Hello everyone, my name is Smajo Beso. I work at Newcastle University as a researcher and teacher. I'm also the chair of the Bosnian Genocide Educational Trust, and I will be talking to you a bit about my own experience of growing up in Bosnia during the Bosnian War and Genocide. I know a lot of you will know about the Second World War and the Holocaust, but I guess not many of you will have heard about Bosnia and what happened there just over 25 years ago. Just for context, I've coloured in Bosnia there in red. My family came to the UK in July 1994 as refugees. We left everyone and everything behind because we had no other choice. The Northeast has been so welcoming to us over the last 25 years, and we've had the most incredible support and opportunity to rebuild our lives. We often see news reports about refugees, about migrants, asylum seekers. We see figures and statistics, documents, but sometimes we forget that behind every statistic, behind every label, behind every document, there is a human being. There is a human experience. This information, this history matters to me far more than statistics and numbers. I was born in a little town called Stolac in southern Bosnia. It's really a beautiful part of the country with a lot of incredible architecture, natural landscape, and Bosnia was very much a normal and modern European country. We had everything that we have here: cinema, theatre, museums. A year before I was born, Bosnia hosted the Winter Olympics in the capital, Sarajevo. And some of your teachers might remember Torval and Dean becoming the highest scoring figure skaters of all time. In 1991, my parents were in their 30s, about my age now. We had just moved into our new home that my parents had designed and built, and childhood was just amazing. In Bosnia, we weren't raised to differentiate between Muslims or Christians or to identify people along their ethnic or religious lines. In my family, we still have Muslims, Christians, Jews, and atheists. And this is a photograph of me with some of my cousins and friends, and I'm the one with blonde hair there being held by one of my cousins. The only difference between us kids was which cartoon we liked, which books we liked to read, and always the big question, which football club we supported. I just knew at certain times of the year we would visit our friends on Christmas and buy presents for each other and have a nice meal, and they would do the same for us on Eid. Then came a time when none of that mattered anymore. Bosnia became the scene of the biggest atrocities on European soil just 50 years after the Holocaust. In over 3.5 years of destruction, more than 100,000 people were killed. More than 2 million people were expelled from their homes and became refugees. Between 20 and 80,000 young girls and women were raped. Bosnia became the biggest network of concentration camps since the Holocaust. There are still more than 7,000 missing persons in Bosnia today. I think it's far easier to imagine murder, rape, genocide, and all those awful things to be perpetrated by strangers, by monsters, people that are not like us. You don't expect normal people to be able to do these things. You expect them to happen somewhere else, to someone else. These are things that you see on TV that can't happen to us. You can imagine unknown soldiers coming into town, maybe even speaking a different language, maybe wearing an unfamiliar uniform covered in unfamiliar symbols or flags of a foreign country. It's easier to imagine that than to imagine your next door neighbor, your friend, your classmate, your teacher wanting to kill you just because of who you are. But that is exactly what happened in Bosnia. Majority of these perpetrators before the war were good, honest, ordinary people. But they were persuaded into thinking that a whole group of people didn't belong, in the same way that many Germans were persuaded into thinking that all Jews didn't belong in Germany during the Second World War. In 1991, I was 6 years old. My parents had just moved into our new home. My dad worked in a local factory. My mom looked after us, and this is a photograph I'm on the right there with my cousin and my brother. I was old enough to see things changing around me, but I didn't fully understand what was happening. At that age, you're too busy playing and being a child, but you can still pick up bits that your parents and the other adults are discussing, the worried faces, and you knew something wasn't right. One day, I remember running to the house and seeing my mom in front of the TV crying. She tried to hide away her tears, but I could see she was upset. As a child, you sense the emotions in your parents' face. I remember she hugged me so hard and kissed me and said, go outside and play and don't worry. And again, I was just a child and I did. And it was only years later that I realized that my mom was watching TV and she was seeing news of the war spreading across the country, and it was getting closer and closer to us. And she knew there was absolutely nothing she could do to help us. A few months later, war did come to us in the spring of 1992, and our little town was surrounded by the Serbian army first. And at first, these soldiers were coming over for coffee. These were friends, people that my parents knew, but then things quickly changed. We started hearing rumors of concentration camps and torture and rape and killing. One day, a soldier friend that had been over so many times before, he came over. I ran up to him like I usually did, and he just pushed me away. And I was like, what is going on? He was ranting about Muslims doing something somewhere. I just remember thinking, what has this got to do with me? I haven't done anything. He then got his knife out and started sharpening it. He said it was a good day for cutting throats. And you can imagine how scared and worried we all were. And we were just lucky that that day we had a close Serbian friend that came and saved us. First few months of war were probably the most difficult. The shock, the realization that it's actually happening to you, that it's not something that you see on TV. The shock of not having water, food, electricity, being shelled and shot at every single day. Imagine all the things that we now take for granted. They're gone overnight. Not being able to sleep at night because of the constant gunfire and explosions and screams. Not being able to switch on the lights when you want. Not being able to go down to the kitchen and just grab a drink or something from the fridge when you want. In the first 9 months of war, we moved more than 14 times. My dad and my uncles and cousins joined the army to fight against the Serbs alongside their Croatian friends and neighbors. They weren't soldiers though. My dad, as I said, worked in a factory before the war. We tried to get on with our lives the best we could. We tried our hardest to preserve normality and friendships and relationships. Old games were replaced by games about the war with shooting, grenades and tanks. Maybe some of you like collecting objects, books, football tops. Well, me and my brother started collecting bullets. That was our childhood. But again, things started changing. Muslims once again started becoming the scapegoat. All Muslims were to be photographed and recorded. This is me on the left, my sister, and my brother far right. Then, on the 1st of July, so just over a year after we had escaped from our home, the Croatians this time started rounding up all Bosnian Muslim men, and we had escaped from our home and we were staying with one of my uncles in a neighboring town. All Muslim men were arrested, but not just those of fighting age. The oldest was 90 years old and the youngest was just 13. Local shops and hospitals and factories were set up as places of torture and rape. And my dad was taken to a camp called Dretelj. It was known as the Camp of Death. He lost 26 kilograms or 4 stone in the first couple of weeks. So this is a photograph, I think, 6 months after he had been released from the prison camp. And you can still hear how skinny he is. Day after my dad was taken, soldiers came to take my uncle that we were staying with. One of the men that came to take him away was actually his daughter's boyfriend. And I still remember my sister screaming at the top of her lungs, "You've taken my dad, please don't take my uncle." And we all ran to him and we all tried to prevent them from taking him, but they took him anyway. These black and white images are from Europe 1993, but you'd be forgiven for thinking that they were from Europe 1943 and the Holocaust. Women and children remained behind for more than a month, not knowing what had happened to them. We thought they were all killed. We had soldiers coming to our house, threatening to kill us, to rape everyone. All of our Croatian friends and neighbors forgot us overnight. The only sympathy that we got was from animals. We had a dog called Leslie. We got him just before the war started. He was a German Shepherd, so he was a big dog by now. And he was so protective of us. But when he started howling and barking, we knew something bad was happening, and we'd always run. So he could sense danger before shelling or shooting would start. He would start howling, he would start hiding, and we would do the same. By August 1993, so a month after my dad was taken, Leslie wasn't eating at all. He was actually just burying all of his food. And for us, that was a clear sign. My mum packed our bags, and Leslie was right. On the 4th of August, soldiers came and threw us out of our home and forced us to march to a local factory, the one that my dad had actually worked just before the war. And we had to make a decision about what to do with Leslie. I was begging my mum to take him with us, but really I knew we couldn't. Leslie was part of our family. My mum tied him behind the house, thinking he'd be safe there, because if he came with us, it was so protective. He'd attack the soldiers, they would shoot him, they would shoot us. And she tied him behind the house, left loads of food, and thinking, who would hurt an animal? Who would hurt a dog? As we walked away, we heard 2 gunshots. Our neighbours shot Leslie as they tried to get into our house. Some houses were already on fire, as were libraries, archives, museums. Local shops, hospitals, and factories were set up as places of torture and rape. There was already hundreds of people at the factory by the time we arrived there. People crying and panicking. I remember my mum holding on to me so hard. I actually remember my hand hurting so much. We saw young girls and women being singled out. And my mum was forced to sign this document to say that she was given everything that we had up for safekeeping. Just a few months ago, while I was doing research at the university, I actually found that very document. And that document shows that my mum signed over 2 pairs of earrings and 1 wedding ring for safekeeping. She is number 13 on the list, and you can see that is her signature right there. And there were thousands of other signatures on this list. And these documents are so incredibly important and useful. My mom broke down in tears. It was a physical proof of her experience, of our experience that day. But these documents, although they're so useful and so vital, they're impossible to convey the reality of what happened that day. These documents can't tell us that this whole ordeal lasted more than 45 minutes of us being searched and grabbed. It doesn't tell us that the earrings were taken from my little sister and they had been given to her by my granddad before he passed away. It doesn't tell us how my sister cried and begged them not to take them off her. It doesn't tell us how I was bribed with chocolate. One of the soldiers kept saying to me, if you tell me where your mom is hiding the money, I'll buy you a big chocolate bar. And I could see myself crying in the reflection of his sunglasses. This document doesn't tell us that my mom knew one of the soldiers and that he had a family of his own. She tried to plead and beg, but he didn't help. It doesn't tell us anything about how this soldier then started searching my mom, grabbing her. It doesn't tell us how scared I was and how much we all cried and screamed at seeing these soldiers grabbing my mom and thinking what is going to happen to us. These soldiers didn't see a friend anymore. They didn't see a mother with kids. They didn't see the humanity in us. We were reduced to a statistic, to a signature, to a piece of gold. And that is exactly what the humanization leads to. We were loaded onto cattle trucks, and we didn't know where we were going. We thought we would all be killed. And this was August. In Bosnia, you know, temperatures get up to 40, 45 degrees, so it was incredibly hot. We were driven for about an hour, hour and a half, and we were eventually dropped off near to Bosnian government-controlled territory. We were already exhausted and thirsty. We didn't really know where we were going or what we would find. We marched on. There was hundreds of people panicking and crying, belongings all over the road. There was elderly, unable to walk anymore, sitting by the road and crying. And I just kept thinking about my grandparents and if they managed to make it. At one point, I remember stepping over something, a foam mattress, which I thought was covering a pile of clothes. But as I stepped on it, I felt something different. It wasn't clothes, it wasn't soft. And as the mattress slid off, I realized it was the body of an old man, about my granddad's age at the time. After weeks of constantly moving and living in ruins, we eventually settled in a town called Mostar. That's one with the famous old bridge that I showed you right at the start. And Mostar was surrounded by Serbian army on one side and the Croatian army on the other side. And this is that bridge which was eventually destroyed. But we were lucky. We stayed with my mom's sister, my auntie Amina. My mom's sister had 2 kids. My uncle was there as well. My grandparents did actually make it just before us, and they were already there. And she was always my favorite auntie. She was always joking around, always had a smile on her face. She had this big, long, wavy hair. She was 38, so just a few years older than me now. And my mom and auntie were so creative because Mostar was surrounded. We didn't have a lot of food. We didn't have water. It was freezing, but they were so creative and they always managed to put food on the table somehow. I still don't understand how they did it, but they did it somehow. They used chicken feed to make bread. They used grass to make pies. You know, there wasn't a day that we didn't fall asleep hungry. We eventually started night school, really as an act of defiance. You know, we're here trying to learn and you're there trying to kill us because we couldn't go out and fight. So this was our way of fighting and resisting. We used to have night classes because it was too dangerous to go out during the day. And I loved school. I had missed so much school already and I was just about to start school before the war started. And it was a brief moment of normality and seeing our friends. And I really, really loved it. We also started getting letters from my dad through the International Red Cross. And because I had missed so much school, I was trying to catch up, trying to, you know, learn to read and write. And this paragraph right here at the bottom, this is the first time that my dad saw my writing for the first time, real writing. I actually wrote this on the 15th of February, 1994 to him. And that was really my motivation to keep going. I remember my last night of school though, it was on the 23rd of January, 1994. That night, Croatians used a plane to drop bombs onto Mostar. Through my classroom window, I could see our whole street up in flames. There was so much panic and screaming and everyone's running around and I was just frozen in shock. I don't remember crying. I don't remember screaming. I just kept looking at our house because I knew that's where my auntie was. I knew that's where my family was. That's where my grandparents was. And I thought they were all dead. Back at the house, my auntie was wounded. My grandparents and her 2 kids and my sister actually carried her out of the house on a blanket. They tried to find a car, but petrol was almost impossible to come by. They managed to get into our neighbor's car and they just pushed and pushed. And remember, they're still being shot at, shelled. It's pitch black. And they just pushed and pushed. They managed to get her to another car that had a bit of petrol. They started driving, but that car ran out of petrol as well. And they just pushed and pushed and pushed. And they managed to get her to a hospital. And this wasn't a real hospital. This was a makeshift hospital without any medical equipment or medicine, but at least they had some doctors. She lost so much blood by this point, and the doctors battled really hard to save her. But sadly, she passed away the next morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, actually. The peace agreement with the Croatians was signed just a few weeks later, I think exactly 6 weeks later. The easiest thing for my mom to do in that moment, the most soothing thing to do in that moment, she's just lost her sister. Her kids are starving. She hasn't seen her husband or any of her other male relatives in months. The easiest and the most soothing thing would have been to tell us to direct our anger at Croatians and to say that they're all the same, that they're all responsible. But she realized what an impact that could actually have on us. She sat us down on the very day that her sister was killed and carefully explained that we can't live our life in anger and hate, and that the best way to resist those that were killing us was not to become hateful and angry like them. And that was the most courageous thing that my mother could have done in that moment, but it was the best gift that anyone could have given us. A few months later, we were lucky enough to escape with the British Red Cross, and we came to the UK. My parents had an opportunity to leave Bosnia early on in the war, but they decided to stay. No one wants to leave their home unless they really have to. We hear that word refugee used frequently at the moment, but how much do we really know about what a refugee is? And this was Newcastle, July 1994, when we were reunited with my dad. So my dad was taken out of a prison camp and he was brought to the UK, and he didn't have much say in that because the UK government at the time signed an agreement with Croatia. So he didn't have much say and he came here. My dad actually requested to be sent back because we were still in Bosnia. So he came to the UK on the 19th of January, 1994. On the 19th of June, we left Bosnia, and we literally had a couple of hours to say goodbye to everyone. And we spent a month in a refugee camp in Croatia, and we came to Newcastle on the 19th of July, 1994. So number 19 is our lucky number. We had the most incredible support from the people in the Northeast. And if it wasn't for the amazing people here, well, we wouldn't have come in the first place. We wouldn't have been brought here. And we definitely wouldn't have managed to survive. So I was 9 years old when I came to the UK, and I started school. I started year 5 without knowing a word of English. My primary school teacher was amazing, but I couldn't understand anything she was saying. And she had this thing, at the end of each day, she would get all of us to sit down, she would play the guitar, and we'd all sing this song about having a great day at school with our friends and so on. And everyone would be so happy and they'd all be singing. And I figured out quickly that she would start singing, then she would say someone's name, and that person's name becomes part of the song. We all sing it together and they get to go home first. And she would do that until she's obviously been through all of us. But I hated this part of the day because they were all so happy and they were all trying to encourage me to sing, and I just hated it. One day we sat down, she started playing the guitar, and I was like, not this again. And they started singing this song, but this time in Bosnian. So while I was having separate lessons to try and learn English, she took time out to teach her entire class how to sing this song in Bosnian to make me feel welcome. I mean, that was absolutely incredible. Literally the first day that I went home with a smile on my face, I felt I was finally at home. And I actually met that teacher for the first time since last year or the year before, working on another project. But for me, it was a lot easier. I was younger. My brother and sister were both older. And, you know, they struggled. But my brother eventually went to university. He did biomedical science. He got a first, graduated, then went to university again, did medicine, and now he works as a doctor here in Newcastle. My sister, she was a lot older. She started working after college, working with refugees and vulnerable people, and she still does this today. And when you're made to feel so welcome, these small acts of kindness make the biggest difference. We all now call Newcastle and the Northeast, proudly call it our home. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, my contact details are on the screen. Please feel free to email me and I'll try my hardest to answer all of them. Thank you.